to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through a story talking about career bureaucrats, career lawmakers, and career politicians. How do we restrict it? How do we pull back on it? How do we make sure that they can be effective while also allowing for room for new voices and making sure they don't make a career out of it? And of course, we will end today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, it's enough rambling for me. Let's jump into our daily debate. How do we restrict the government bureaucracy, the government as a job, from being overwhelming? And what I mean by that is, how long should people that work in government be able to work in government? Is there a cap on there for time? Is there another restriction that you would put on there? Is there limited access to lobbying? What would you do? Throw your comments down in the comments section. Just brief overview of how you would fix it if you think it's a problem at all. And then I'll go through, I'll read them and see if anybody has any interesting ideas, and we may return to it if anybody does. So, of course, let's jump in to our story that actually talks about this, which comes from the Daily Caller. Headline reads, Dana Lish says American functions better when working in Congress is a horrible job. Now, that's a pretty interesting way to put it. I think that obviously they're going for the snappy headline there, because you don't want it to be so horrible of a job that you don't actually get good people in there. You don't want it to be so terrible that the experts, that people who have a wealth of knowledge in certain areas, do not at least get compensated for going and trying to bring forward policy proposals in order to fix certain issues. An example would be, you do not want a engineer to be discouraged from coming and possibly consulting on a bill about infrastructure if they can't get paid enough, if it's a terrible job, because then you have novice, or at least people who are not 100% informed, and obviously no one is 100% informed, but not even 75% informed, not even 50% informed, not even 50%. They don't even have the 50% of the necessary information in order to make a bill that will actually address the issues, make sure that we can continue to fund infrastructure, how much costs are going to be. And you can, of course, do studies, but if you have an expert that you can consult rather than doing an expensive study that could possibly save money. So there are different issues there. Obviously, consulting is very different than actually going in and having a job. So in a consulting sense, maybe that makes sense. Maybe these sort of jobs are only consulting and they only do them when necessary rather than keeping them on payroll. But what about the people that need to fill out paperwork, that need to assist people? Like, an example would be in the Social Security Administration. As we've talked about before, Social Security is something that I could see go by the wayside and not necessarily be upset. But while it exists, there have to be people to facilitate the payments. There have to be people to solve issues. As of right now, we don't have technology in AI that's good enough to fully sort through all the potential issues at this point. So we still need humans to do it. But how do you restrict their long-term career aspirations in order to ensure that they're not there too long, that they're not actually just using this job to make a paycheck and stay employed in the long run? How do you ensure that the costs for these sort of things are low? Because there obviously is a point where if you hire someone new every 5 years, every 4 years, the cost of training that person and the cost of paying for their mistakes, because they don't actually know what they're doing, could be higher than the salary you were paying the person before. So where is that balance? I think 20 years is not too much of a crazy idea. I also think that if you really want to, and this would be extremely heavy-handed, but if we're going to really have this argument, if we're really going to take it to its absolute maximum, I think sometimes you have to discuss those a little bit crazy ideas and work your way back. So what about a 5-year in the private sector, maybe even a 7-year in the private sector restriction? So you have to spend 5 years or 7 years in the private sector in order to be brought on as a policy expert in certain areas, in order to ensure that, one, you come to the table with knowledge, because you can't just come to the job without expertise. And obviously they're always looking for people with expertise and that experience, but we don't want to even have a system where people go to college and get that information and they get that quote unquote expertise without necessarily doing it in the real world and apply directly into those positions. You don't even want that to happen, though obviously when looking for certain positions, like I said, they will actively look for that private sector experience, or at least that outside government experience. There are still pathways to get to jobs similar to that, but higher up through government. And that's how people make a career out of it. They come in at a base level as a policy advisor, and then they work their way up. They make connections, they make friends, and then they have some expertise. They have it from a government perspective rather than the practical perspective, which is what may be needed in a lot of these cases. And also, if they realize they can make a lot more money in the private sector, if we say, okay, we need more people in the private sector anyway, then they come in, they do the job that they need to. They can make it a civic duty, something that is more of an obligation. And literally, in the word civic duty, or in the phrase civic duty, is duty. It's a duty. Duties aren't always easy. Duties are sometimes hard to take on. It's a burden that you take on, but you do it because you want to, because you want to better your country, because you want to better the infrastructure in your country. You want to ensure that food is safe within your country. You want to make sure that the oldest people in your country are able to survive on a system that they've paid into. And though it may be unfairly stripping the lower or younger generations of their wealth, those people that did pay into it can't just be thrown to the wayside. So, with that, let's actually read a quote from this article from the Daily Caller. Quote, during an appearance on Jesse Watters' Primetime, Lynch said that the structure of the U.S. government was never meant to reward lifetime lawmakers. Lynch also pushed back on the outrage over political trading in stocks, pointing to the Stock Act of 2012 that it doesn't prohibit members of Congress from doing so, from trading stocks. It merely requires disclosure. And I heard somebody actually make an interesting argument the other day on this front. So we've moved, in my opinion, past the bureaucrats, past those career appointees, and now we're talking directly about senators and House members, or even people that would get into office or in certain locations like judges. That could also apply, because in certain states you actually have to run for some of the higher judge slots. So how do we roll back this idea that politicians can just stay in office for a very long time? Obviously, having term limits that equal the same amount of time. So I think one that I like, simply because of the symmetry of it, is you can, as a House member, you can run 6 times, or as a Senate member, you can run 2 times. Overall, that equals 12 years. That gives a good amount of time where you're able to actually learn the functionings of government. Say there's a 5-year adjusting period, and that's pretty long. I mean, most people would be able to figure out their job in 5 years. But there's lots of nuance and lots of extra layers to the American system when it comes to legislating, and being able to build up those connections can also be very effective. You don't want to have somebody that is constantly being thrown into the system. They get put into a caucus because they were voted in as a Republican or Democrat, and they don't build enough connections across the island in order to possibly work on different legislation with them. So I feel like 12 years is a pretty good threshold. Also, if they know that only 12 years is coming, maybe they start lining up jobs. So obviously, you would have to restrict. And what I mean is, if they see the 12 years coming, they're going to start angling for lobbying positions outside of it. So maybe you have a even longer restriction on going into lobbying when leaving government. And you may be thinking, wow, Alex, this is very anti-liberty. This is very, well, people should be able to do whatever they want. And I agree. People should be able to do whatever they want. I also don't want to forget the fact that when you are directly using our taxpayer dollars in order to fund different programs, and you've used our taxpayer dollars to get into a position where you can leverage your experience in order to get a new job where you're going to actually lobby to spend more of our taxpayer dollars, it cannot not be a consideration. It's not that I want to infringe upon their right to do something, it's that I want to prevent corruption, and I want to prevent the government from growing out of control. I think those two things can be very well oriented while still ensuring that there is freedom of choice. Now, I want to, of course, caveat all of this with, say, it's harebrained, okay? To strip the people of their power, they would have to do it willingly, essentially, which is probably not going to happen. But we can't let the Overton window shift on this. We can't just be super cynical. We have to continue to talk about it. We have to continue to bring up these ideas, because maybe one person out there who is a little bit younger right now, maybe one message gets to them and they say, actually, yeah, I agree. And they're the next person to get onto the floor and say, we need to have these restrictions. We need to make sure that we cannot run for this many extra terms. We need to make sure the career politicians get out of here so we have a fresh flow of ideas. And when that person gets on in the social media economy and the attention economy in the United States, they will probably go ham on social media, and maybe they can actually make change. So, with that said, let's go to something a little bit more positive. Let's go to our Daily Delight. Headline on this one reads, "A relatable video reveals stages of raising a pit bull." The place it's posted is Dog Time. And honestly, from little pup to baby armchair dog to, and what I mean by armchair dog is one that you just hold in your arms, to full grown loudmouth. I mean, he's got all the stages here, and it's absolutely adorable. So if you want to have a little bit of a smile on your face, go read that article. It will be linked in the description below, that like and subscribe button, as well as the Daily Caller episode. And of course, if you want to check out the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, those links will also be down there. Come back tomorrow or next Tuesday for 6 and 6. It's our international news segment. It's 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less. And with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.